This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem. The plan for this morning, we're going to have 3 shiurim, 2 on Pirkei Avos, and 1 continuing in Biur HaTfilah. If I may, I was remiss that I wasn't able to access it on Wednesday, but I want to take the opportunity to reiterate that today's learning should be Lili Nishmas Rabbi Irwin Nathan, who was one of the leaders of our Chabura for many, many years, for at least a decade that I was involved with the learning. And I see that we have the zchus to have with us in today's shir L'havda ben Chaim L'chaim, Mr. Nathan's wife. So we wish on this occasion. I remember Mr. Nathan very fondly, as Joe mentioned, very involved in the learning. Actually, if you go back and listen to many of the recordings of the shiurim, so Siv Soivsav Doivivos, you could still hear his insights and his additions to our shiurim, and he was really went out of his way to help people. Especially, I remember how he was Meister Nefesh to help his nephew, and we wish the Gan Eden to him and Uchasai should be a Meil Siyosha for his whole family. So I want to speak today about one interesting custom that is widespread in all of Klal Yisrael, and the Rama MiPano's, interestingly, takes issue with it, uncovers its source, and points out that it's not correct. All of Klal Yisrael Kamat, they begin Pirkei Avos, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek la'olam haba. All of Israel have a share in the world to come. Shenamar ve'amich kulam tzadikim, and your nation, they're all righteous. La'olam yirshu aretz, forever they will inherit the land. Neitzar matoy, the branch of my planting, Maseh yad al esbar, my handiwork to be glorified with. Very interestingly, why do we mention this in connection to Pirkei Avos? What does it have to do with Pirkei Avos? It's not part of Pirkei Avos. It's the end of Sanhedrin. And according to some Gersois, it's not even the end of Sanhedrin. So the Rama MiPano's says that this custom to say the Mishnah Kol Yisrael Yeshem Chel L'Olam Haba before every parak of Pirkei Avos is absolutely incorrect. Many commentaries say, well, we're about to learn Pirkei Avos, and we're being held to a very high standard, and the character and the personality traits and the midos that we're expected to develop and engender are very challenging. So you might, throw in the towel and say, nah, it's impossible. I can't. It's not for me. I can't hack this. This is not going to work. So we calm you down. We say, don't worry. This is recommended, but at the end of the day, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek la'olam haba. Even if you don't live up to the expectations of Pirkei Avos, don't worry. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek la'olam haba. Says Rama MiPano's, no, let me tell you how this custom developed, and actually the way we do it is not right. The Rama MiPano's writes in the Asar Mamoros, Maimer Chikar Din, Perk Yates, that he says it's reasonable to say in the Doros HaRishonim, only the Bnei Eretz Yisrael would say Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelek L'Olam Haba, and they would say the whole Perek Chelek, the whole last Perek of Sanhedrin. You know when? When in a year like this year, where Isru Chag Pesach comes out on Shabbos, so we're not starting Pirkei Avos until this week. So what do the Bnei Eretz Yisrael do? They have 7 weeks in between, 7 Shabbos in between Pesach and Shavuos. So what do the Bnei Eretz Yisrael do? So the same way, the Bnei Chutz La'aretz, where there are really 5 prakim and Pirkei Avos, but they add 1 perek of Brisa at the end, perek Vav, which is not really part of Pirkei Avos, in order to get you till Shavuos. So the Bnei Eretz Yisrael actually add a 7th perek. The Shabbos, what's Yom Tif, what the 8th day of Pesach, what's Achron Shel Chag for the Bnei Chutz La'aretz, is a Shabbos for the Bnei Eretz Yisrael. So what do? They say the whole Perek Chelek, Kol Yisrael Yeshem Chel Gama, until the end. Now why do they do that? He says because at the end of Perek Chelek, there's an Achlokas Rav Lezer and Rabbi Kiva by the Aseres HaShvatim, and it's a collection of braiso similar to Perek Kinyan HaTorah, and it talks about the resurrection of the dead. And why do we read about it on Pesach? The same way the Haftarah on Shabbos Chol Hamoed is we read about Tchias HaMesim, because we have a tradition, the resurrection of the dead occurs in Tchias HaMesim. So they read Parak Chelek, that the end of it talks about whether the Aser Shvatim will be resurrected, won't they be resurrected, because this is the month of resurrection. And they begin Pirkei Avos the next week together with the Bnei Chutz La'aretz. U'la'olam lo ha'karin kol Yisrael u'Moshe ki adadi. It never happened legitimately that you read Kol Yisrael Yishem Chel L'Olam Haba and Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai in the same week. Even though none of the later authorities ever figured this out, says Rama MiPano, well, they didn't get it right. But this is the correct and original practice of learning Pirkei Avos. Kol Yisrael is for the Bnei Eretz Yisrael. Only in a year like this, that Isru Chag comes out on Shabbos. They had an empty week, so they learned Parak Chelek. And the Yikr wasn't for Kol Yisrael Yishem Chel L'Olam Haba, the Yikr was for the end. So this is the very unusual discovery of the Rama MiPano. The Yad Yehuda, which is a commentary on the Rama MiPano, says that in the Rama MiPano's opinion, it's mistaber in the early generations. The custom that we have today was not the custom. Only when Pesach came out on the last day of Shabbos, and there were 7 weeks, they would read Chelek, which is Parak Yud of Sanhedrin, on that first week. And for us, we skip it, and we never said Kol Yisrael Yishem Chelek L'Olam Haba ever, ever, ever. Now, what was so special about Kol Yisrael Yishem Chelek L'Olam Haba? Because at the end of that parak, we have the Mishnayos about Ir Anidachas, which talks about Machlokes Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Kiva v'Aseres HaShvatim. And the Yad Yehuda says the same way on Shabbos Chol Hamoed we read about the resurrection in Yechezkel. Ha'isa Allah Yad Hashem. That's the Haftarah of Shabbos Chol Hamoed Pesach. And the Torah brings from Rav Haigain, why do we read that? Because we have a tradition, Tchias HaMesim comes in Chodesh Nisan. So that's the minhag on Pesach as well, on the final day for the Bnei Eretz Yisrael. So interestingly, according to the Rama MiPano, the custom to say Kol Yisrael Abba is misplaced and it should not be done. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. You want to say it, you could say it, but it's just interesting what the source of this minhag is. Okay, so that's part 1.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.